Los Angeles was alive with its usual night rhythm, blaring car horns, distant laughter from late-night bars, and the low hum of neon signs flickering over shadowy streets. Keanu Reeves strolled through the dimly lit sidewalks of downtown, hands tucked casually into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. He had spent the evening at a charity event and was now enjoying the quiet solitude of a nighttime walk. No paparazzi, no flashing cameras, just the cool breeze and the occasional passing stranger. He wasn't in a rush. In fact, he had no real destination. But as he turned onto a quieter street, he spotted a small convenience store, a classic mom-and-pop shop, the kind that had probably been there for decades, resisting the overwhelming gentrification of the city. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed faintly, casting a soft glow through the large glass window. Keanu realized he was thirsty. A bottle of water sounded good, simple, easy. He pulled open the door, the little bell above jingling as he stepped inside. The store was nearly empty, except for a young woman behind the counter who was scrolling through her phone, and an elderly man browsing a newspaper stand. Keanu gave them both a polite nod before heading to the refrigerators at the back. The store smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning supplies, a nostalgic scent that reminded him of simpler days. He reached for a cold bottle of water, twisting the cap slightly as he turned back toward the counter. That's when it happened. The front door slammed open with a force that made the bell above it rattle violently. Two men rushed inside, their faces masked with dark ski masks. One carried a crowbar, the other, far worse, a handgun. "Everybody down!" the man with the gun shouted. The cashier gasped, dropping her phone onto the counter with a loud clatter. The old man by the newspapers froze, his wrinkled hands tightening on the folded pages. Keanu instinctively stepped back, moving into the shadows of the aisle, his heartbeat steady but his senses sharp. He had seen this before, on sets, in scripts, in carefully choreographed stunts. But this was real, and real meant unpredictable. The man with the gun pointed it at the cashier. "Open the register now!" Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the buttons, trying to comply as quickly as possible. The other robber with the crowbar moved toward the old man, shoving him roughly toward the ground. The newspaper scattered across the floor, headlines about politics in Hollywood now trampled under hurried footsteps. Keanu took a slow, deep breath. This wasn't a movie. He wasn't John Wick. He was just a guy who had walked into the wrong store at the wrong time. But then the robber with the gun did something that changed everything. He turned the weapon on the old man. "Give me your wallet," the robber barked. The old man, still on the floor, reached shakily for his back pocket, struggling to retrieve his worn-out leather wallet. Keanu clenched his jaw. He hadn't planned on getting involved. But now he didn't have a choice. Keanu's muscles tensed as he watched the old man struggle to pull out his wallet, his frail hands trembling under the weight of the situation. The gunman grew impatient, stepping closer, pressing the barrel against the man's temple. "Faster, old man," he snapped. A deep, unsettling silence filled the store. The only sound was the nervous breathing of the cashier and the old man's shaky exhales. The second robber, the one with the crowbar, was now ransacking the shelves, grabbing whatever he could, cigarettes, liquor bottles, even a handful of candy bars, as if he was on some twisted shopping spree. Keanu exhaled slowly. He had been in dangerous situations before, real ones, not just stage fight scenes. But this was different. This was life or death. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it fast. The old man finally managed to pull out his wallet and held it up with both hands. "Here, take it," he pleaded. The gunman snatched it, flipping it open with one hand. He pulled out the few crumpled bills inside and scoffed. "Seriously? This is it?" He threw the empty wallet onto the floor. "You gotta be kidding me." And then, without warning, he raised his gun, aiming it directly at the old man's head. Keanu moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It wasn't planned. It was instinct, pure and simple. In a single fluid motion, Keanu stepped out from behind the aisle and grabbed the closest thing to him, a tall metal display stand stacked with bags of chips. With a sudden push, he sent the entire rack crashing down toward the gunman. The distraction worked. The robber jerked backward, startled, as bags of chips exploded into the air like confetti. Keanu didn't waste time. He lunged forward, grabbing the man's wrist and forcing the gun downward. A gunshot rang out, deafeningly loud inside the small store. The bullet shattered a row of glass soda bottles behind the counter. The cashier screamed. The second robber, the one with the crowbar, spun around, momentarily stunned by the chaos. Keanu twisted the gunman's wrist, using just the right amount of pressure to make the man cry out in pain. The gun clattered to the floor. Keanu kicked it away, sending it sliding under the shelves. The gunman, now desperate, threw a wild punch. Keanu dodged, stepping aside with the practiced ease of a man who had spent years training in fight choreography. But this wasn't a film set, and the attacker wasn't pulling his punches. Keanu felt the adrenaline surge through his veins. This was real, and one wrong move could mean the difference between life and death. The second robber finally snapped out of his daze. He tightened his grip on the crowbar and charged. Keanu turned just in time to see the metal bar swinging toward his head. He ducked, narrowly avoiding the impact. The crowbar smashed into the counter, splintering the wood. The cashier scrambled backward, eyes wide with terror. Keanu needed to neutralize both threats, fast. The gunman, still nursing his injured wrist, reached for a pocket knife. But before he could flip it open, Keanu landed a swift, precise kick to his stomach. The man staggered backward, crashing into a display of canned goods. One down. The second robber, now furious, gritted his teeth and charged again, swinging the crowbar wildly. This time, Keanu didn't dodge. He caught the crowbar mid-swing. For a split second, there was a struggle. The robber pulling, Keanu holding firm. But Keanu had the leverage. With a sharp twist, he yanked the weapon out of the man's grip. Now he had the crowbar. The second robber took a nervous step back, suddenly realizing that things had taken a very bad turn for him. Keanu tilted his head slightly, gripping the crowbar loosely in one hand. "You should probably leave," he said calmly. The robber hesitated. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted for the door, nearly slipping on the spilled soda from the shattered bottles. The gunman, still groaning in pain on the floor, saw his partner fleeing and decided it was time to cut his losses. He scrambled up and ran after him, pushing through the door and disappearing into the night. Silence. Keanu took a deep breath, lowering the crowbar. The cashier was still behind the counter, frozen in shock. The old man sat on the floor, staring at his empty wallet like he couldn't believe he was still alive. Keanu turned to the cashier. "You okay?" She blinked as if snapping out of a trance. Yeah, I think so." The old man let out a shaky chuckle. "Son, I don't know who you are, but you sure as hell picked the right night to buy a bottle of water." Keanu smiled. "Just lucky, I guess." And then, just when he thought it was over, the sound of screeching tires pierced the quiet night. The robbers weren't gone. They were coming back. Keanu's sharp instincts kicked in the moment he heard the tires screeching. He turned his head toward the store's front window, just in time to see the getaway car, a black, beat-up sedan, sliding to a halt right outside. The two robbers had barely escaped, and now they were coming back. The cashier gasped. "Oh my God, they're not leaving!" The old man muttered a curse under his breath, gripping the edge of the counter as he tried to stand. Keanu knew this was bad. If these guys had decided to double back, it meant one thing. They were desperate. Desperate people were unpredictable, dangerous. The driver's side door flew open, and a third man stepped out. This one was different. Bigger, meaner looking. He wasn't wearing a mask. A thick scar ran down the left side of his face, cutting through the stubble on his jaw. He carried himself with the confidence of someone used to violence. Keanu's stomach tightened. Great, just what we needed. A leader. The two original robbers ran up to him, talking fast, pointing at the store. One was holding his injured wrist, the other still shaken from the encounter. The scarred man's expression darkened as he listened. Then slowly he turned his gaze toward the store. Straight at Keanu. For a moment there was silence. The kind of silence that happens right before a storm breaks. Then Scarface spoke. His voice was gravelly, like someone who had spent too many years smoking cheap cigarettes. "You," he said, pointing at Keanu. "You're the one who messed up my boys?" Keanu stayed calm. He wasn't looking for a fight, but something told him this guy was. "Your guys tried to rob a store," Keanu replied evenly. "I just, disagreed with their business model. Scarface didn't like that. His jaw tightened and he reached behind his back. Keanu knew what was coming before he even saw it. Gun. A large silver revolver. Not like the small handgun the first robber had. This thing was serious. The kind of weapon that made a statement. The cashier whimpered. The old man tensed, his hands tightening into fists. Keanu stayed perfectly still. Scarface lifted the gun, pointing it at Keanu's chest. "You think you're a hero, tough guy?" Scarface sneered. "Let's see how tough you are with a hole in your—" A sudden burst of sound interrupted him. Not a gunshot. Sirens, loud, close, getting closer. Scarface and his crew whipped their heads toward the street. A few blocks away, flashing red and blue lights reflected off the buildings. Someone had called the police. Maybe a neighbor, maybe the cashier, maybe even the old man. Didn't matter. The moment the robbers saw those lights, everything changed. Scarface cursed under his breath. He wasn't stupid. He knew they didn't have time for this. With one last furious glare at Keanu, he did something unexpected. He threw the gun. The revolver sailed through the air, straight toward Keanu's face. Keanu barely had time to react. He tilted his head just enough, and the heavy weapon missed him by an inch, clattering onto the linoleum floor behind him. By the time he looked back up, the robbers were already scrambling for the car. Scarface jumped into the driver's seat. The other two barely made it inside before the tires screeched against the pavement, smoke billowing as the sedan peeled away from the curb. The car sped off into the night, just as the police cars turned the corner. Too late. They were gone. The sirens wailed as two black and white LAPD cruisers pulled up in front of the store. 4 officers jumped out, weapons drawn, scanning the scene. Keanu raised his hand slightly, signaling he wasn't a threat. The lead officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression, stepped forward. "Everyone okay in here?" The cashier nodded frantically. Yeah, but they just took off." She pointed toward the street. Black sedan, headed west. The officer muttered a curse under her breath and radioed the information in. The other officers began checking the store, making sure no one was hurt. The old man sighed. "Well, that was fun." Keanu exhaled, feeling the tension finally leave his body. He glanced down at the revolver that Scarface had thrown at him. The police officer followed his gaze. "That theirs?" "Yeah," Keanu said. "Not really my style." She gave him a second look, as if just now realizing who he was. "Wait a second," she said. You're Keanu Reeves." Keanu offered a small, tired smile. "Guilty," the officer blinked. "You just fought off a group of armed robbers?" "Technically, they fought me," Keanu said. "I just disagreed with their business model." The old man burst out laughing. The officer shook her head, half impressed, half exasperated. "You got lucky," she said. "These guys? They're dangerous. We've been tracking their crew for weeks." Keanu's expression darkened. "Yeah, their boss, the guy with the scar, he's not done." The officer studied him for a moment. "You think he'll come back?" Keanu looked out the store window, into the dark city streets. He had a feeling this wasn't over. Not yet. The convenience store was still buzzing with nervous energy, even though the immediate danger had passed. The cashier was breathing heavily, her hands shaking as she wiped her forehead. The old man, now sitting on a stool near the counter, muttered something about needing a drink after this mess. Outside, the police were coordinating their next steps. Officers spoke into radios, descriptions of the getaway car being broadcasted across the city. The silver revolver Scarface had thrown now lay in an evidence bag, its weight heavier than just metal and gunpowder. It carried a promise, one Keanu knew wasn't finished yet. The lead officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Ramirez, turned back to Keanu. "You really handled yourself back there," she said, crossing her arms. "Not many people would have stayed calm, let alone fought back." Keanu gave her a small, knowing smile. "I've had some practice." "Yeah, I bet. You okay?" He nodded. "I'm good, but I don't think this is over." Ramirez frowned. "What do you mean?" "Scarface didn't come back out of revenge. He came back because he had something to prove. He's not going to just let this go." Ramirez exhaled. "Yeah, I know the type." She turned toward the other officers. "All right, Let's get a unit patrolling the area. I want eyes on every street leading out of here. If they're still in the city, we'll find them." The officers got to work, but Keanu had a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. Scarface wasn't going to wait for the cops to find him. He was already planning his next move. Keanu looked at the cashier. She was still visibly shaken, but she managed a weak smile. "Thank you," she said softly. You really saved us." Keanu nodded. "Just right place, right time." The old man chuckled. "Yeah, well, next time the right place and right time better not be my store. My heart can't take another one of these." Despite the tension, the joke broke the ice. The cashier even let out a nervous laugh. That's when Keanu's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. Unknown number. A cold feeling crept up his spine. He answered. "Yeah?" At first there was silence. Then a slow, deliberate voice came through. "That was cute, movie star. Real cute." Keanu's grip tightened on the phone. "Scarface." A low chuckle. "You cost me tonight. My boys are pissed. You embarrassed me. And I don't like being embarrassed." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Maybe you should rethink your career choices." Scarface ignored the remark. "Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna meet me, alone. No cops, no cameras. Just you and me. We settle this like men." Keanu took a breath. "And if I don't?" Scarface let out another short laugh. "Then maybe I start paying visits to people in that store. Maybe that nice cashier gets a visit after her shift. Maybe the old man wakes up to a fire in his shop. Maybe I make this personal." Keanu's heart pounded. He glanced at the cashier who was still watching him, oblivious to the conversation. Scarface wasn't bluffing. He was desperate, and desperate men were reckless. Keanu took another breath. "Where?" Scarface gave him an address, an abandoned warehouse near the outskirts of the city. "You got 1 hour," Scarface said. "Be smart, movie star." The line went dead. Keanu lowered the phone, his mind racing. Sergeant Ramirez noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" Keanu hesitated. If he told the cops, Scarface might lash out and hurt innocent people. If he went alone, he could be walking into a trap. But there was only one real choice. "I need to handle something," he finally said. Ramirez narrowed her eyes. "You're not thinking of doing something stupid, are you?" Keanu gave her a small, tired smile. "I try not to." The old man watched him closely. "You gonna be all right, son?" Keanu nodded. "Yeah." He turned toward the door. "I'll be back." As he stepped outside, the cool night air hit his face. The city around him was still alive, unaware that a storm was brewing on its outskirts. Keanu Reeves was about to walk straight into the fire, and this time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. The city lights faded behind Keanu as he drove toward the industrial outskirts of Los Angeles. The hum of his motorcycle was the only sound cutting through the quiet, abandoned streets. He had been in dangerous situations before, both on screen and in real life. But this was different. This wasn't a choreographed fight scene. There were no stunt doubles, no second takes. This was real. And Scarface? He wasn't playing a role. He was a man with nothing to lose. The warehouse loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of rusting metal and shattered windows. A single light flickered above the entrance, casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. Keanu pulled up, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath. He could turn back. He could walk away. But then he thought about the cashier, shaking behind the counter, the old man gripping his empty wallet. The way Scarface had threatened them so casually, like they were nothing. Walking away wasn't an option. Keanu stepped off his bike and pushed open the rusted warehouse door. It groaned on its hinges, the sound echoing into the cavernous space beyond. Inside, Scarface was waiting. He stood in the center of the room, flanked by the 2 robbers from the store. They looked worse for wear, one cradling his injured wrist, the other still rattled from their failed heist. Scarface, however, was perfectly calm. He held a cigarette between his fingers, the ember glowing in the dim light. Keanu took slow, measured steps forward, stopping just a few feet away. "You came," Scarface said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess you really do think you're a hero." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "I just don't like bullies." Scarface chuckled. "You've got guts, movie star. I'll give you that." He flicked his cigarette onto the floor and stomped it out with his boot. But guts won't save you tonight. The two robbers shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure if they wanted to be part of whatever was about to happen. Scarface reached into his jacket. Keanu's body tensed, preparing for another gun, but instead Scarface pulled out a long, serrated knife. "See, I wanted to handle this the old-fashioned way," he said, rolling his shoulders. "Man to man. No cameras, no stunt doubles, just a real fight." Keanu let out a slow breath. "You sure about that?" Scarface grinned. "What, you scared?" Keanu sighed, almost disappointed. "I was hoping you'd be smarter than this." Scarface lunged. The knife slashed through the air, aimed straight for Keanu's ribs. But Keanu had already moved. With practiced precision, he sidestepped, grabbing Scarface's wrist and twisting sharply. The knife clattered to the floor. Scarface barely had time to react before Keanu drove his elbow into his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. The two robbers hesitated, glancing at each other. They had already been humiliated once tonight. Did they really want to do this again? Keanu turned to them. "You two don't have to be here." They exchanged a look. Then without a word they bolted, disappearing into the night. Scarface spat blood onto the floor and wiped his mouth. "Cowards," he muttered. Keanu took a step forward. "It's over." Scarface growled, charging again, swinging wildly. Keanu blocked one hit, dodged another, then countered with a sharp knee to the gut. Scarface gasped, staggering. Keanu didn't give him time to recover. He grabbed the back of Scarface's jacket and drove him into a stack of wooden crates. The impact sent dust flying into the air. Scarface groaned, trying to push himself up. Keanu crouched beside him. "You're done," he said firmly. "The cops are looking for you. Your guys just abandoned you. You've got nothing left." Scarface glared at him. "You think you're better than me?" Keanu's expression was calm. "No," he said, "but I made better choices." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night. The police were closing in. Scarface knew it too. He slumped against the crates, his breath ragged. "You really are a pain in the ass, Reeves." Keanu gave a small shrug. "I've been told that before." Minutes later, squad cars skidded to a stop outside the warehouse. Officers stormed in, weapons drawn. Sergeant Ramirez was the first to spot Keanu. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. "You actually came here alone?" Keanu stood up and dusted off his jacket. "Technically, I wasn't alone. He was here too." He gestured toward Scarface. Ramirez sighed. "You really don't know how to stay out of trouble, do you?" Keanu smiled. "Guess not." The officers hauled Scarface to his feet, cuffing him as he muttered curses under his breath. As the police led him away, Ramirez turned back to Keanu. "Well, I guess I owe you a thank you, again." Keanu shook his head. "Just glad no one got hurt," she smirked. "Yeah, well, next time try calling us before you walk into a trap." "I'll think about it," Keanu said with a grin. Ramirez rolled her eyes. "Yeah, right." As the police wrapped up their work, Keanu walked back to his motorcycle. The night air was crisp, the city lights twinkling in the distance. It had been one hell of a night. He swung his leg over the bike, started the engine, and took one last look at the scene behind him. Then, with a small shake of his head, he muttered, "I just wanted a bottle of water." And with that, he rode off into the night.